The 2019 NFL Draft is in the books, and the Dolphins accumulated a six-player draft class headlined by Christian Wilkins and supplemented by the acquisition via trade of quarterback Josh Rosen. Overall, I thought this was a sound, savvy, and intelligent draft for Chris Grier and the Miami Dolphins. As always, with the draft process, it's going to take 2 to 4 years to truly and fairly determine how good the players are. And while I liked what the Dolphins did as a whole, I do have some questions, and there is some room to criticize and second-guess from the outside looking in. But let's start by acknowledging that this was a unique draft and that many people's expectations have shifted during the 2019 offseason. Gone are the days where the front office operates and the fans behave in a manner which would indicate the team is just a few players away from being a contender, from being able to win consistently. The narrative of rebuilding or tanking has sunk in for most out there. So my feeling from interacting with fans on the radio and on social media is that no one entered free agency or the draft weekend with oversized expectations about the Dolphins roster or state of the franchise. It's abundantly clear they're rebuilding. They've got a new coach, an entire new staff. Gone are Mike Tannenbaum and Adam Gase. Gone are Ryan Tannehill, Cam Wake, Juwan James, Robert Quinn, and others. This is a fresh start, and Chris Grier, one of the few holdovers, is treating it that way. So, with that perspective in mind, they were never going to be able to address every need on a roster with some major holes in it, but they did add some players who you'd expect to come in and make an immediate impact, both because they're talented and also out of necessity. Let's begin in the first round. With the 13th overall pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the Dolphins selected Christian Wilkins, defensive tackle from Clemson. He comes in with a sterling resume, 2018 first-team All-American. He was a Bednarik, Nagurski, and Outland Trophy finalist, 57 tackles, 15 for loss, 6 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles, a two-time national champion. He's the first scholarship Clemson football player to earn a degree in just 2.5 years and actually enters the NFL with 2 degrees. He's 23 years old, and he has a master's. He won the prestigious William V. Campbell Trophy after his senior season, essentially the academic Heisman Trophy. And Pro Football Focus said Wilkins was one of 2 players to rank in the top 5 in both total pressures and defensive stops in 2018, showing he's capable of being dominant regardless of what play is called. So you look at his versatility. He can play defensive end in the 3-4. He can play nose tackle in the 3-4, and he can play defensive tackle in the 4-3. He brings Brian Flores versatility, toughness, intelligence, and leadership to both the defense and the locker room. I absolutely love Wilkins, the player and the person. He's charismatic. He's a hard worker. And I had the chance to interview Wilkins on the radio about 30 minutes after he was drafted by the Dolphins, and many of his comments stood out, but this one did so specifically. I asked him about helping to establish a culture with the Dolphins, and he said this, quote, "I feel like I'm just the right guy for the job. I'm a good draft pick for that. I don't mean that in an arrogant way. I just feel like if you're trying to establish culture, I'm the guy for that because I'm so huge on it. I'm a big believer of the biggest things that allow teams to win and win consistently are chemistry and leadership. I feel like I'm going to bring my leadership abilities to the organization, make it better, and through great leadership, we're going to build chemistry. I feel like leadership is universal, and I'm going to bring that to the team no matter what," end quote. Now, how many rookies embrace taking a leadership role and discuss culture establishment in that manner? Not many. I can tell you from interviewing a number of these guys over the years, he obviously has to have the goods on the field to back up this talk, right? If he's going to be a leader, he must be productive on the field, and he needs to do that to rally those around him. But I absolutely love his makeup, and it's really clear why the Dolphins, Chris Grier, and Brian Flores would want this player to infuse his talent and his personality into the Dolphins organization. Now, with that being said, we can always ask the question, was this the right pick? And in this case, I'd also pose this question. Was this the safe pick? Because Wilkins projects to be a strong contributor on the field, great presence in the locker room, a model citizen and representative of the organization in the community. He's got a charismatic personality and is a natural-born leader. However, in selecting Wilkins at number 13, the Dolphins bypassed the opportunity to draft Ohio State quarterback Dwayne Haskins, a potential game-changing franchise quarterback, a player with the potential to be exactly what this franchise has been missing since Dan Marino retired. He had 4,831 yards, first in FBS, 50 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions last season. He set Big Ten records for passing yards and touchdowns. He was third in the Heisman voting. And strangely enough, he's the first Big Ten quarterback to be selected in the first round since Kerry Collins in 1995. Last season against top 25 defenses, Haskins posted a 6-0 record, threw for 20 touchdowns versus 2 interceptions, and over 331 passing yards per game. Quarterback, as you all know, is the most important position in all of sports. Did the Dolphins pass up on the opportunity to fill a massive void, a void they've been trying to fill unsuccessfully for the last 20 years? Well, we started night 2 of the NFL draft with those questions looming over the decision-making process. However, once they traded down in the second round and ultimately traded the 62nd overall pick to the Cardinals, along with a 5th-rounder next year for Josh Rosen, you can argue that they indeed did get a player who has the potential to fill that void at quarterback. Without making an actual pick, Josh Rosen is essentially Miami's second-round selection in 2019. And for those of you who follow me on Twitter or listen to me on the radio, I was initially very unhappy with the compensation in this trade. I thought Chris Grier should have held out and stood firm and not surrendered a second-rounder, but instead a third-rounder, because Arizona didn't appear to have any leverage whatsoever. However, with the benefit of some time, I've come around quite a bit, and overall, I really like this move by Grier in Miami. Here's the good news about this. If you like these guys or not, Mel Kiper and Todd McShay each had higher draft grades for Rosen than any of the quarterbacks in this year's draft. Arizona has already paid Rosen's signing bonus, so he's set to make just $6.24 million over the next 3 seasons, which is an absolute bargain for his starting quarterback in the NFL. You get your possible long-term answer at the most important position in sports for a late second-rounder and a 5th in 2020, and additionally, you get a highly motivated, talented young man with something to prove. The other side of this, maybe the bad news you could call it, Rosen is coming off an extremely tough and rough rookie season in Arizona. He completed 55% of his passes with 11 touchdowns and 14 interceptions and an NFL low 66.7 passer rating in 13 starts in which he compiled a 3-10 record. But he did so behind arguably the NFL's worst offensive line and on a team that fired its coaching staff after one season and saw a couple of different offensive coordinators during that campaign. And by the way, this is the first time since 1970 that a first-round quarterback has changed teams after one season with the team that drafted him. And the reason I've put that under bad news category is because you don't often see a team that moves up in the draft to take a guy at number 10 overall and then a year later move on from him. But that's the case as the Cardinals drafted Kyler Murray. Listen, upside, the value, the potential, all too great to pass up for Miami, and this sets up what will be a fascinating season for the Dolphins. Now fans have something to look forward to. Instead of Ryan Fitzpatrick, you've got Josh Rosen, and the question, can he be your franchise quarterback? We have a season to find out. If he can, then you've solved something you've been unable to do since Dan Marino retired. If not, you can still select a quarterback that you love in the 2020 draft. The acquisition of Rosen and his contract situation do not preclude the Dolphins from taking a quarterback next year. So, getting back to the point I was making, I, along with other Dolphins fans, will be closely monitoring the progress of Rosen, Wilkins, and Dwayne Haskins to see how each player develops in the NFL. I'm going to be anxious to see if we look back and say the Dolphins did the prudent thing by acquiring Rosen and adding Wilkins and having a dynamic defensive player along with their franchise quarterback, or I certainly hope this isn't the case, but will they look back and rue the day that they did not take Dwayne Haskins and allowed him to pass them up and instead took Wilkins, a defensive tackle? Well, looking more at this draft class, Wilkins and Rosen are clearly the headliners, but the Dolphins made 5 additional picks. In the 3rd round, they selected Michael Dieter, offensive lineman from Wisconsin. He played left tackle, left guard, and center at Wisconsin. He's 6'5", 309 pounds. He earned 2nd-team All-American honors as a senior and started a whopping 54 consecutive games for the Badgers. Wisconsin has produced plenty of offensive line talent over the years, and considering Dieter's resume and the Dolphins' needs, he should get every opportunity to start as a rookie. Miami needs a left guard, and he should be the top candidate to fill that role. Chris Grier said in his pre-draft press conference that he wanted to get 3 starters out of the 2019 NFL Draft. Wilkins, Rosen, and Dieter will be those 3 in my opinion, and I think that that is a strong start to this new regime and rebuilding process for the Miami Dolphins. As for the rest of the draft class, in the 5th round at number 151, they selected Andrew Van Ginkel, the outside linebacker from Wisconsin. In the 6th, they went with offensive tackle from Ohio State, Isaiah Prince, with the number 202 overall pick. Then they had back-to-back selections in the 7th round at number 233, Chandler Cox, fullback from Auburn, and then 234, Myles Gaskin, the Washington running back, were picked. Van Ginkel bounced around in college, starting at South Dakota before transferring to Iowa Western Community College, and ultimately played his last 2 seasons of college ball at Wisconsin. He started 11 games as a senior, did miss 2 with an ankle injury, and he earned third-team All-Big Ten honors by collecting 46 tackles, 4.5 sacks, 7 tackles for loss, 2 breakups, and a block kick. He should be a scheme fit for what the Dolphins are expected to do, and he'll have plenty of opportunity to earn playing time, and at least in the short term, will be relied upon to play special teams. Now, Prince departs Ohio State as a 3-year starter at right tackle, where there's a void on the Dolphins roster because of the departure of Jawan James, and some draft experts view him as a bit of a project who needs time to develop into a starter on the next level, but it sounds like there's some upside there with Isaiah Prince. As for the 7th-round picks, the Finns surprisingly drafted a fullback in Chandler Cox. That position is almost extinct, but Chad O'Shea is coming to Miami from New England, where they've utilized James Devlin in recent years, and the Dolphins felt Cox was the best fullback in the draft. And as for Gaskin, he was extremely productive and consistent at Washington, 4 consecutive seasons with 1,200-plus rushing yards. He exits college as the Pac-12's 3rd all-time leading rusher and the NCAA's 13th all-time leading rusher, and he'll certainly be in the mix to make the roster behind Kenyon Drake and Kalen Ballage. So that's a rundown of the draft class. You'll notice the Dolphins didn't draft a defensive back, so they remain very thin at the cornerback spot opposite Xavier Howard. They also could have added a more traditional outside pass rusher, but again, they were never going to fill all of their needs in just this year's draft. 2 more points to leave you with. First, Chris Grier and the Dolphins set themselves up to be major players in next year's draft and possibly in most moving forward. Grier has indicated a shift in philosophy where he'd love to have draft weekend flexibility every year by compiling picks. He did exactly that for 2020. The Dolphins are set up to have their 6 original picks for the 2020 draft, 1 in each round except for the 5th rounder that they gave up to the Arizona Cardinals. Additionally, they'll have a 2nd rounder they got from the Saints, a 3rd rounder projected as a compensatory pick, a 4th rounder from the Titans, another compensatory pick projected in the 5th round, a Cowboys pick in the 6th, and a 7th rounder from the Chiefs. You add that to a projected $120+ million in cap space, and I know we have a year to wait, but the 2020 offseason should be much more entertaining for Dolphins fans. And finally, to wrap this up, if you really want to boil it down, the success or lack thereof of this draft is about Christian Wilkins and Josh Rosen. Michael Dieter may turn into a solid starter on the offensive line. Van Ginkel, Prince, Cox, and Gaskin may develop into contributors. Certainly, they should help on special teams in the short term, but this draft will ultimately be judged by the performance of Wilkins and Rosen. If they pan out, this draft will be a tremendous success. If not, it would be a familiar, sad story for Dolphins fans. But time will tell, and for now, I like what the Dolphins accomplished in the 2019 NFL Draft. One final note in closing, I promise. I finished my draft evaluation last year mentioning this and thought I'd revisit it. An alarming fact about the Dolphins' draft history. There are now only 2 Dolphins draft picks still on the roster from before 2015. Walt Aikens was a 2014 4th-round pick and Rashad Jones a 5th-rounder in 2010. Let's hope there's more staying power for the class of 2019.